Sorry about the delay on this one, folks. I needed at least one good night to sleep on this anime because this film freaking messed with my head, and I liked it. Akira, or my personal favorite, who gives a crap of how this is pronounced? Now, the story of Akira takes place in the near future in the year 2019 in the city of Neo-Tokyo around a biker gang, specifically around two members, those of Kaneda and Tetsuo, and both of these characters are supposedly longtime best friends. Anyways, during the course of one of their usual biker raids, they come across this group called the Clowns, and they ended up taking them out during the course of the opening act. Unfortunately, after the rest of the act, Tetsuo is captured by the government and experimented on, and then we just see the rapid decline of Tetsuo and the dynamic between him and his biker gang, as well as seeing him slowly growing out of control. That's about the most condensed plot summary I could possibly come up with, given the fact that I have to avoid spoilers as much as possible. Unfortunately, I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep that consistent throughout this review for the sake of explaining something, but I'll get to that in a moment. Anyways, let's go ahead and start diving into the good things about this film, because there are quite a few of them to mention. One of my buddies on YouTube by the name of Klonoa, he actually told me that this is one of the few anime films shot on 70mm, and boy does it show. The level of visual presentation and beauty of it, and despite the gore aspect, and how, trust me, there is a lot of blood and gore in this movie, especially a lot of body horror aspects, there's lots of visual details and cues that you don't really notice in a lot of films that do show up on this film because of the 70mm format, and it just helps sell the picture a lot better. One of the best things I can mention about this movie as well is the score. The score, if I had to describe it in one word to someone, I would say it is the best kind of the word creepy. And what I mean by the word creepy is that there are certain scenes of body horror that you see during the course of the film that when the music plays during that scene, it adds to the creepy factor. It makes it feel a lot more eerie and a lot more disturbing than what it really could be if you just saw it with no music. So this is one of those cases where the music is an absolute enhancement to the film, and it actually becomes iconic in its own sense. When you hear this certain song going through a certain scene, you will instantly remember it after you see the film. Even now, after a day of hearing it, I can still remember every single scene that happened with that score, and it always sticks in my head, and it still feels disturbing and creepy every time I think about it. Probably the best positive I can say about this movie is actually the themes that it represents. One particular theme, that there is the idea that if a person comes into power, or if a person already has power, if they do not have the willpower, the maturity, and the discipline to exercise that power wisely, then there's a possibility that the person who has that power, regardless of whether that be physical, supernatural, or some other form of power, is that if they do not exert that level of discipline and maturity, they could end up abusing said power, or to the point of it being self-destructive or destructive to other people outside of themselves. Now that I've mentioned all the positives, there's one thing I have to remark on, and I must admit this is the main reason of why this review was a little bit delayed. The main problem with this film is the dynamic that supposedly exists between the characters. In the film, we're supposed to believe, as the audience, and the movie tries to convey to us, that these two are longtime best friends, that they've known each other for years, and they've spent a lot of time together, and they're supposed to have a good dynamic between each other. And we're given evidence of that in the form of flashbacks in the past. But here's where the problem comes into play, and I'm going to have to spoil a little bit of how this film progresses and how it executes itself, but I have to do this in order to convey the point. Is that during the course of the film, in the opening act, we actually do see a good bit of time where Kaneda and Tetsuo are together. But the only problem is that after that moment, after the opening act, a majority of the film spends the time of them conflicting with each other and being at odds with one another. And so, with Tetsuo changing throughout the course of the film and conflicting with Kaneda, despite his level of concern, he still gets frustrated at Tetsuo because of how Tetsuo acts to Kaneda. And so, it makes me kind of wonder, are these two really these great of friends? Because the dynamic of the film is not exactly demonstrating it well. Because it doesn't give us the level of chance as the audience to feel sorry for these characters because of the fact that if these two are longtime best friends, if they've known each other for so long, then if by the time the film ends, as the audience, we should be feeling completely sorry for them. that forces beyond their control have ripped these friends asunder and make sure that these two friends have now torn themselves apart. But that level of relatability is not shown to us as the audience because of the fact that during a majority of the film, they spend time either apart from each other trying to deal with their own crap, or whenever they do show up, they're at odds with each other constantly. And so the level and intention of trying to make these two best friends seemingly try to rip apart from each other doesn't convey itself well throughout the film. In fact, it kind of falls flat. And here's a couple of examples I have just to emphasize what I'm trying to get across here. X-Men First Class was about Eric Lancher and Professor Xavier getting together, forming their powers, forming their friendship, and then seeing ultimately that friendship fall apart. We all kind of heard this story if we know about the X-Men. And it actually worked because we saw it start, we saw it grow, we saw the dynamic between them, their philosophies conflicting with each other, and then we ultimately saw the tragedy of that event. Or better yet, let's take a more recent example in the form of Chronicle, which more or less could be considered as a live-action adaptation of Akira. Chronicle, you actually see these characters grow, you saw their friends becoming friends together, you saw the dynamic of them ripping apart, but it all worked throughout the course of the film because it was a steady progression. You saw it as it happened, and you felt sorry for these characters, and you felt relatability towards them. Even Prince of Egypt, something that came out way long after, or way before, that either Chronicle or X-Men First Class, with Prince of Egypt, you actually see the whole movie is literally about the dynamic between Moses and Ramesses conflicting with each other as brothers because of forces beyond their control. And the whole film was about that, and the level of the tragedy that happened with that, it was effective because that was the focus. And you saw both of them conflicting with each other. In fact, at one point, when Moses actually does come back, he's hugged by Ramesses. The fact that he still sees him as a brother despite the fact that he was banished and came back. And so, in Akira, that absence of a good rapport between Kaneda and Tetsuo is absent. And you don't see that. You don't feel sympathy for it as an audience. And so the level of effective emotional tragedy is lessened by the fact that there is no good rapport between the characters, despite the supposed information that we are given in the form of flashbacks of the fact that these two have known each other for a long time. I apologize if that was a little long-winded, folks. This was a very complicated point to try and illustrate, and I'm sorry that I had to compare the films, but in order to emphasize the point, I felt like it was necessary. So, with that said, what do I rate Akira? It's often regarded as a classic, and I don't disagree with that at all. I do feel like it has its place in anime history. I do feel like it is a very important film to recognize in terms of popularity rising in the West for animation. And so, with that said, where exactly does it stand with my ratings? Well, the animation and the music, all superb. Really iconic, really fitting for the film, has a great scale to it, visually stunning, the music is creepy as hell. The characters are not exactly the best in the portrayal in terms of their dynamic and the emotional impact that we as the audience receive. Not only that, but the themes that it presents are actually really interesting, and they make us think about the potential abuse of power, the discipline to exercise that power, but to use it wisely. That's the most important thing, is to use that power wisely and to know when to start using it. And if it eventually consumes us, it will not only destroy us, but everything else around us that we hold dear. So with that said, I'm going to have to give Akira the rating of it's worth watching, but not perfect. So there you go, folks. That's my review of Akira. I hope that my points and my understanding of the film and my analysis of it at least made a little bit of sense. If you have a different opinion of Akira, if you think it's the greatest film ever made, perfectly fine. I will not argue with you on that one. That's just my analysis of the film. And despite my desire to be objective as I can, I realize that I'm not going to be perfect at this, but I can do the best that I can. So with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed my Akira review. Stay tuned for later in the day when I'm going to have my review for Sword of the Stranger. So until next time, everybody, I'm Perry the One-Armed Legend, and I'll see you later.